Welcome back, deep divers. Today, we're going to tackle a pretty intense topic, something that's always fascinated me, to be honest.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one.
It's Roman deportation. Specifically, how Rome used it in Hispania, the Iberian Peninsula.
Right.
To, control and assimilate conquered people.
Yeah, you could almost think of it as, ancient relocation programs.
Whoa, okay, that's a heavy comparison. But yeah, I see what you mean.
On a massive scale, though.
Yeah.
Like empire-wide.
So for this deep dive, we're working with a really interesting scholarly article. It basically digs into how the Romans kind of redrew the cultural map of Spain using this deportation tactic. It's like historical detective work.
Oh, absolutely. And it really highlights how the Romans consolidated their power.
Yeah.
Not just, through military force, but through strategic population management. And the thing is, this wasn't just some random thing they did once.
Oh, so it was like a system.
Yeah, they applied it across their whole empire.
Yeah.
However they expanded, basically.
So I guess what I'm getting at is, it wasn't just cruelty for the sake of cruelty. There was a method to this relocation madness.
You got it. Romans were, you could say, masters of pragmatism.
Yeah.
Deporting conquered people served a lot of purposes. And I mean everyone, not just the elites, everyday folks too.
Just to disrupt things.
Right. Weaken resistance, remove the leaders, scatter the population. It's much harder to rebel that way.
Divide and conquer. Classic.
Exactly. But it's more than just weakening the enemy, right? They'd also use this to create loyal populations elsewhere in the empire. Imagine you're, a farmer. Your land's gone, your community's shattered.
Brew.
Rome comes along, offers you land, a fresh start. You might start seeing them as saviors, not oppressors,
That's a pretty clever, if manipulative, tactic.
For sure. It's fostering dependence, yeah, but through both force and opportunity.
Okay, but this wasn't unique to Hispania, was it? Were there other examples of this, like Roman playbook in action?
Oh, tons. The article mentions quite a few, like the Pisantini from central Italy. They were probably moved north after rebelling against Rome.
Okay.
And then the Ligurians. They were famous for being super tough opponents.
Oh, yeah, those guys.
They ended up resettled, hundreds of kilometers away, in Samnium.
Wow.
Oh, and then there's, the most famous case, Cilician pirates.
Ah, the pirates.
Pompey, the Roman general, dealt with them by basically scattering them across the entire Mediterranean. Their raids were a constant problem.
So basically, Rome was, problem solved.
Yeah, I mean, it shows this was a standard tool for them, a key part of how they ran their empire.
Wow. Okay. So let's focus on Hispania. Where do we see this strategy happening specifically on the Iberian Peninsula?
Well, our source really gets into the Lusitanians. They were in Western Hispania, and man, they gave Rome a hard time for decades.
I'm guessing the Romans eventually turned to deportation.
You know it. 139 BC. After 20 years of war, the Lusitanian leader, Totulus, surrendered. Rome was probably exhausted from all the fighting.
20 years is a long time.
It is. So they needed to come up with a creative solution.
Okay, lay it on me. What did Rome do?
Well, the sources get a little iffy here, but it looks like they disarmed the Lusitanians and moved them south of the Tagus River.
Okay.
Probably mixed them in with the Celtic groups already living there, break up their power base, integrate them into a more Roman-controlled area,
It's like forced migration and forced assimilation all in one go, huh?
Exactly. And here's the interesting part. They might have even made a new city for them. We've got to jump ahead a few decades to the 70s BC. The Sertorian War, a huge conflict in Hispania, had just ended. And this is where another big Roman general enters the scene. Pompey. Yep, he was tasked with restoring order, and he had his own ideas about how to handle the people who sided with the rebels.
So Pompey's the guy in charge. The Sertorian War is over. What's his plan? I think I can guess.
Yeah, you're probably right on the money. Deportation, tried and true Roman method. But this time, he decided to send them over the Pyrenees Mountains, into Gaul.
Over the mountains. Wow, that's a whole other level. Who exactly got sent packing, and where did they end up?
Well, according to our source, it was a mix of groups. All the ones who had backed Sertorius, that rebel leader, the Vetones, the Arevaci, Celtiberians too, all known for being warriors resisting Roman rule.
Makes sense why Pompey wanted them gone, so where'd they go?
A new city, actually. Libdanum. Today it's Saint-Martouri in France.
A brand new city. Wow, so how did they fit these deportees into this new place? Did they just become Roman, or did they keep their own culture?
That's where it gets really interesting. The name the Romans gave this new community was Convene.
Convene. What's that mean?
It means intertwined. They were deliberately mixing these different groups together, maybe hoping that blending them would make them less likely to cause trouble.
Convene, the intertwined. It's like such a Roman thing, right? Like
Yeah.
using social engineering to control people, not just moving them, but reshaping their whole identity, their community, like some kind of social experiment. But did it work? Did this mixing actually lead to them becoming Romanized?
Well, that's a question historians are still trying to figure out. We see signs of both, cultural continuity, but Romanization too. Think about those Celtiberian coins we mentioned. The fact those communities kept making them, even after being relocated, it suggests they were holding on to parts of their identity.
So it wasn't a complete break. They weren't just absorbed into Roman culture. They kept some parts of their past alive, even while adapting to their new home.
Exactly.
It's way more complex than just erasing one culture and forcing another one down. It was like a mixing, with Roman and indigenous traditions both surviving and changing side by side. And it's not just in stuff they made, but also language, religion, even city planning. Roman cities in Hispania often have elements of indigenous architecture and design. Shows there was exchange and adaptation going on.
So it wasn't just Romans marching in and forcing their ways on everyone. Romanization, at least in Hispania, so like it had more nuance with give and take on both sides.
You got it. And it's something our source really stresses. Romanization wasn't just one way. It involved negotiation, adaptation, and yeah, sometimes resistance too. But it also makes you wonder about the people who were deported. We see the archaeology, the records, but what was it actually like for them to be forced to leave and build a new life in a strange land? Yeah, it's important to remember the human side of history. They weren't just dots on a map. They were people with families, beliefs, traditions. How did all this impact their identity, their sense of belonging? Those are tough questions, but definitely worth thinking about as we dig into this part of Roman history. But before we go too deep into individual stories, I'm curious about the bigger picture. You mentioned Romans saw deportation as a way to, civilize conquered people. What did that look like in practice? Was it just a cover for imposing Roman culture, or is there more to it?
Well, it definitely came from this belief that Romans were superior. They thought their way of life, their laws, their customs, they were just better, plain and simple. And you see that in some of the writing from back then. But there's also a practical side to it. They figured that by integrating people into their cities, introducing them to Roman laws and stuff, they'd create a more stable, more productive province.
So it's ideology mixed with practicality. They thought they were bringing civilization, but they also knew that having a stable province was in their best interest.
Exactly. It wasn't just forcing their will on people, but making a system that worked for them and, in theory, for the people they conquered. And you can see that in how they built cities in Hispania. They weren't just military bases. They were meant to be hubs for trade, administration, cultural exchange. They wanted to attract people, get them into the Roman way of life, often by offering things like citizenship and economic opportunities. It wasn't always about force.
So Roman cities were kind of like magnets, promising a better life, a more civilized existence. But what about those who didn't want to become Roman? What about the ones who held on to their traditions and beliefs? Were they just pushed aside, or did they manage to adapt and thrive in this new Roman world?
That question takes us to an even deeper level of this whole historical puzzle. Roman influence was huge, obviously, but those native cultures didn't just vanish. They survived, they adapted, and in some cases, they even thrived under Roman rule. And that's something we'll look at more as we explore the long-term impacts of these policies and how they shaped the Iberian Peninsula for centuries.
It's been quite a journey, huh? Through Roman Hispania, we've seen how deportation wasn't just about moving people around, but reshaping entire societies, cultures, even identities.
Yeah, it's wild how the Romans tried to, engineer social change, thinking they could just mix populations together and create this unified Roman province.
And as we've seen, it was way more complicated than that. Pushback, adaptation, mixing. So the big question is, did they succeed? Did this whole Roman experiment actually work? Did they get the fully integrated Romanized Hispania they were aiming for?
Well, it depends on how you define success, I guess. On the surface, yeah, you could say so. Roman culture definitely took root. The language, the laws, the impact on architecture and cities. But if you look closer, you see traces of those indigenous cultures woven in.
Like those Celtiberian coins. They're a powerful symbol of how those communities held on to their traditions, even in this Romanized world.
For sure. And it goes beyond objects. Linguistic studies show that a lot of the pre-Roman languages didn't just disappear, they influenced Spanish and Portuguese. We also see this blend of religious practices, with Roman gods and indigenous deities being worshipped together. And then there's the fact that regional differences persisted, showing that local identities were strong.
So it wasn't just cultural domination, more like a fusion, a mix of Roman and indigenous elements creating something new. And this must have had a long-term impact on the Iberian Peninsula, even after Rome was gone.
Oh, absolutely. This period set the stage for a shared cultural heritage in Spain and Portugal. Regional differences remained, but there was this sense of unity, too, rooted in this shared Roman experience. It's kind of mind-blowing. Something as disruptive as forced relocation ends up contributing to a sense of national identity centuries later. It shows how complex and often unpredictable history can be.
It really does. This brutal chapter of conquest and displacement plays a part in shaping national unity. It makes you think about the unintended consequences of historical events.
For sure. And it reminds us that history isn't simple. It's messy, full of contradictions, and these legacies we still grapple with today. The Roman period was a huge turning point for Hispania, but it wasn't a complete erasure. Indigenous cultures were resilient, they adapted, and ultimately they played a key role in creating the unique cultural tapestry of the Iberian Peninsula.
That's a great way to put it. This deep dive into Roman deportation has really challenged what we think we know about empires, about cultural exchange, and how the past shapes the present.
Couldn't have said better myself. And remember, this is just scratching the surface. There's so much more to uncover about this period. So keep those questions coming, keep digging deeper, and keep exploring the past.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Roman history. Until next time, keep exploring.